there will be these places that I find in my body that feel like me. Feels like there's some sense of self there. And I don't notice that until it like releases and it's gone. And it's like, oh, that me, it just disappeared. I guess that wasn't me. Or even if it doesn't like release or dissolve, but if I just, my sense of myself shifts in a certain way with that part of my body, I just sort of like, it's like the physical version of examining the assumption, of asking the physical, like, say it's in my left hip, there's a spot in my left hip that feels like me. And then I just suddenly sort of relate to that left hip a little differently. I'm like, wait, like it's almost like stepping back a little bit, or just like turning and looking at it from a different angle and being like, whoa, that's not me. That's just part of my body. um and I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I'm doing that all the time. And part of what, a big part of my toolkit, I think, of like the practices that I do are practices that allow me to make those observations and examine those assumptions. And for other people, they seem to like doing, a lot of people like doing faster stuff, or like more intense or strenuous kind of, even within yoga, say they like doing a pretty like intense yoga, or they get a lot of creative expression from doing like fast-paced dancing or something. And for me, with this type of process that I'm describing, it seems like to be effective, it has to be very subtle and kind of like quiet, like still or quiet. So I do a lot of like standing meditation. I do some yoga, and it's just very simple, very simple. And so really simple postures, very focused on the breath, and just very focused on like feeling into my body in these ways of like, what parts of my body do I lean into and develop identity around. And I guess this would map to, IFS parts, although I think of IFS parts as having emotional components, and this would not always have an emotional component. What else would it map to? I think I think when I started getting really into these explorations, there's this thing of like, oh, I am my body. I don't have a body. I am my body. Okay, I get it now. And then later on in the process, it was like, oh, I am my body, but I'm also something more than my body. And this really, the time this was most prominently clear to me was when I was getting a really bad massage one time, not that long ago. She was doing like, I guess they were good techniques and stuff, but I'm really energetically sensitive, and there are things about her energy and the way she was approaching me and touching me and relating to me and relating to my body, and I just felt like there's so much lacking in terms of her level of sensitivity and awareness and energetic channels that just felt very closed to me. So what was really striking about that exchange was that, let's say she was working on my calf, it felt like she was nowhere near me, the thing that feels like me. She was so far away from. She was all up in my tissues, and she was nowhere near touching me because of her presence and what was online and what was offline for her. And I didn't really realize until that moment how much of what feels like me is like not my body, but it's not my body. It's not separate from my body. It's this like thing that swirls all through my body and includes the physical structures of my body, and is also all of this immaterial, energetic, emotional emotional, meaning rich stuff that's happening, and she felt so far away from that, and that is what really feels like me. But there's all these places where that gets mixed up with like habit patterns in my body. And the last thing I'll say about it is that um this seems to happen a lot in parts of my body that I move from. So a big part of what I'm trying to do in my process is move more freely or like more naturally. And I don't know much about the Alexander technique, but I imagine there's a lot of overlap here. It's, yeah, my very basic understanding of Alexander technique, or some aspect of Alexander technique, is you're like letting your body do what it already knows how to do without micromanaging it unconsciously. And yeah, I apologize to Alexander technique people if that's not a fair representation, but like I am trying to do that too. And so like I've been feeling into this question recently of like, where do I walk from? Where do people walk from? Where does one walk from? Like, where does that movement start? Or that's not even a full enough question. Where does the momentum of the walking come from? Where does the action of the walking come from? Where does the whole thing come from? Like, does it come from the feet? Does it come from the ground? Does it come from the hips? Does it come from the ankles? Does it come from none of the above, all of the above? And just feeling into that while I'm walking. Can you see why when people are like, so what have you been up to lately? I'm like, ah, shit, all this weird stuff. How am I gonna give any kind of normal answer to that question? Yeah, so feeling into like, where do I walk from? What is the least micromanagey way I could walk? How does my body want to walk? If it could just walk as naturally as it wants, how does my body want to walk? It already knows how to walk. Can I just let it? And that's when I'll notice that when I'm walking more effortfully or managing it more, that is where there will be those spots in my hip that feel like chain. So they've sort of taken on this form of identity, and they're like needing to exert in some kind of slightly unnatural way and control the movement a little bit. And not like that's a really bad thing, you know. I think I don't want to be like idealistic or perfectionist about bodies or how they're supposed to work or whatever, you know, and like it's fine that you know, I don't walk completely perfectly or whatever, but it's really interesting for me personally to examine these specific illusory senses of self in my body.